Actua's outreach team will outline a process of connecting curriculum to Indigenous knowledge, and will explore the connections that were made within their STEM programming. So I will pass it over to Alicia and Naomi, and then they can continue with their presentation here.
Awesome, thank you, Tammy. As Tammy said, my name is Alicia Henderson, and I'm part of Actua's outreach team. So I'm an outreach and content specialist, and I work closely with the team to help develop relevant and engaging content for youth across the country, for our outreach team in the communities that we reach.
Awesome. Can everyone see the screen that I just shared? Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also part of Actua's outreach team, and I'm really excited to join you folks here today.
Okay. So I'd like to kick off our presentation. As Tammy said, we'll be talking about making STEM culturally relevant and working through a process connecting different curriculum connections to different aspects of Indigenous knowledge. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the land that we're presenting from. So Actua is located in Ottawa, which is the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I know everyone is coming from different places and experiences, so I'd like us all to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we are on and think about what it means to be where you are right now. Okay, thank you, everyone. Awesome. So as I mentioned, perfect. No, all good, Amy.
So we've kind of introduced ourselves already, but I'll let Alicia explain herself a little bit further.
Yeah, I just want to talk quickly about our backgrounds. I've had an opportunity to work with Actua when I was in university and travel around as an instructor. So I had an opportunity to go to Nunavut, Northern Ontario and Labrador and work with the youth in the communities there. And I also have a background in teaching and social sciences from Nipissing and Laurier in Brantford.
Awesome. So as I mentioned, my name is Naomi. I have also been working with Actua for a number of years on the outreach team, and now currently working on programming for mostly in remote and Indigenous communities. My background is in life sciences, which I did a Bachelor's of Science at McMaster University. So I'm very excited to be here with all you folks today, and there's lots of faces that we've seen in the last session. So thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I also just like to take a moment to acknowledge our positionality. Alicia and I, in this work, we are both settlers to the land that we are currently calling Canada, and we would like to acknowledge the immense privilege that we have had in these positions to create some really amazing relationships with Indigenous educators and elders across the land. And without that opportunity, we really would not have some of the knowledge that we have today. So we really want to thank all the relationships that we have, and it's because of those relationships that we are able to share with you what we have learned today. And so we want really today to be an opportunity for all of us to share in our knowledge and continue working and learning together. So we really do encourage you to use the chat, share any information resources that you have, and there will be an opportunity at the end for all of us to engage in some small breakout rooms where we can continue that learning and that sharing. So thank you so much. And as I say, we're going to share and continue listening and learning from each other. We're going to really jump right into that to begin with. So we're going to start off. An easy way to get you started is to start with a poll. So I just would love to see where everybody is coming from today, what your position is, so what your role is. If it, hopefully these categories work for where your role is. If it's other, you feel free to tell us in the chat what you're doing and what brought you here today. Give us an answer. I hope everyone can see the poll. I'm seeing some answers coming in, so that's awesome. I think that there is a second poll question there, so feel free to answer that now. We'll address that one in a little bit as well. I'm seeing lots of elementary and middle school educators, welcome. Then our high school and outreach look like our next areas. So thank you all so much for joining us. Give it a little bit more time. Don't worry about the second poll question. I'll relaunch that one later when we have a chance to talk about it. So you can, if you answered it, no worries, we'll look at that again later. So I'm just really focused on that first question there. All right, so looks like most of us are high school or elementary school teachers. There's quite a few others that maybe don't fit the categories that we have given, but thank you all for joining us. So I'll end that. Yeah, so we're all coming from different places, but our knowledge today, hopefully we can all share and learn from each other. So the in-chat response, this is where I would love really for you guys to engage in that chat. We would love to know, just so far, we've had 3 really amazing sessions so far. And I think as these sessions continue, we're building on our knowledge and taking lots from each piece. And if there's something that's really stuck with you throughout the last couple of sessions, what is it? Or if there's something that you're still thinking on, things that, that maybe you're looking to bring into your classroom, what kind of has been your big takeaway so far? What have you engaged with the most in these sessions? Maybe there's something from every session, maybe there's been one thing that you've seen a theme throughout. Well, feel free to put those in the chat. Yeah, getting outside. Yeah, really listening. Yeah, definitely. Not a trauma for sure. Connectedness is a big one in me. Yeah. Looking, listening, engaging, relational focus, getting back to relationship with the land. I think that's a big one for everybody. And especially after we've been online for so long too. I think that's even more, for me at least, it's even more evident. Connection to outdoors, getting outside. Yeah, shifting our viewpoint. I think that's a really big one, and something, you know, I'm always striving for. Holistic learning and listening. Yeah, they go hand in hand for sure. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of connection, listening, engaging with one another. Land-based community anywhere. Yeah, I agree, Amy. The stories have been really wonderful to listen to. Yeah, the importance of experiencing and not just teaching about it. So really enjoying life and learning about life, and then being able to share that together. Learning from knowledge keepers, yeah. The value of Indigenous knowledge in our classroom. Yeah, hugely important. Wow, these are all amazing. I'm trying to get through all of them. I don't think I'm reading fast enough. I hope everyone's able to take all these in, because there are so many amazing takeaways. And I think it looks like we are all taking a lot of similar messages in, but as we all do in our own way, we're able to kind of fit them into what's going to make sense for us in our teaching and in our own lives. As someone said, like, not just teaching, it's our experiences. The power of land education, reconciliation, self-awareness. Yeah. Oh my goodness, these are so amazing. Okay, so I hope everyone has a chance to read through them. I hope I've captured enough of them. And if I haven't, I apologize. I hope everyone has a chance to read through. I'm going to move on to the next chat response question. So it's another poll. I'm going to reshare that poll. I know some of us did answer it the first time, but I would like us to all answer it again. So this time you're going to look at just that second question. How confident are you in bridging Indigenous knowledge and specifically your curriculum into the classroom? Today, we're really talking about how we can make sure that our curriculum is connecting to some of this Indigenous knowledge that we're able to share and engage with. How are you based maybe on your confidence level? So very confident, confident, neutral, not confident, or not confident at all. And recognizing that, remember, wherever you are today, it's the starting point. Maybe if we'd asked this question a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago, the answer might be different. So our knowledge is always changing, and our comfort rate levels as we learn and build relationships is growing for sure. So I'm seeing lots of no answers. I'll maybe give it a couple more seconds, see if anyone else would like to vote. And I will share our results as well. So we can see that a lot of us are pretty neutral. Maybe we're not super confident, but we don't have, we do have a little bit of confidence. So that's nice to see. And someone saying in the chat, they're beginning to increase their confidence. And I think that's the same for all of us. Leisha and I are up here presenting today, but I think my confidence, I would probably answer neutral as well, or maybe a little bit confident, because it's always there. And I think that's a good spot to be, is that we're always learning and we're always looking to improve and continue building on our knowledge. So awesome. Thank you all for sharing. All right, so our next question is another in chat. So I will again try to do my best to highlight everything that you folks say. But what are some successes that you've had in the classroom outside the classroom and bridging some knowledge. It can be, really specific. It can be successes that you've had personally as an educator, successes that you've seen, really whatever you define as success. And I'm not going to put any borders on what success is too. So however you think of success, I would love to hear what that is for you. Okay, someone's saying they're in relation to confidence, you're wanting more concrete things. There's lots of theoretical connections, but yeah, definitely. I think we can listen to a lot, but we want to see something concrete for sure. Bringing students to National Park, yeah, learning on the land. That sounds beautiful. Visual arts, so being able to use virtual tours in a time where we're all online. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Any other successes that people are thinking about or things that they've enjoyed? Yeah, engaging with elders, more hands-on learning. Yeah, I really like this comment, Stan, about incorporating the community as well. That's so important. Yeah, understanding different perspectives, gathering information to improve experiences, using life cycles in the medicine wheel. Working with teachers to connect curriculum and seasonal activities. Yeah, that's awesome. Inviting local knowledge keepers as a guest. And I really like that you're having them more than once, and you can build that relationship, not just with yourself and your knowledge keeper, but with the students as well. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, amazing. Lots of successes, and it's really amazing to hear. I hope everyone's able to read those chats as well. Yeah, building a collection of resources that are relevant for your colleagues as well, and you've all built together. That's a really, really great way to work together. Awesome. All right, so I'm just gonna touch on base on, I think these cover some of the things, but some successes that we thought of that we've had include place-based learning and really using locally relevant information. So starting from that position of local and community based knowledge, and then connecting it to your curriculum. As we've seen, lots of you folks have been able to invite elders or knowledge keepers into your classroom and build that relationship with them. Personally build a relationship, and also have your students build those relationships. And we also just like to note as well that is so important. And when you're doing that, also really engaging in proper out of protocols. And as Kathy mentioned a few sessions ago as well, making sure that they're being appropriately paid and compensated for their time, which is so valuable. Also incorporating media, Indigenous media where possible. Books and films, lesson plans by other Indigenous educators when it's not possible to have somebody directly in your classroom can be an awesome strategy as well. And we know this leads to, we've seen this already, we've talked about this, but this leads to a really good connection between youth's personal experience and their own identity and the lessons that you're leading. And also just increase engagement in school and the curriculum in general. Sometimes that can be challenging, but we know that this type of work leads to those changes. And also identity and representation. We talked a little bit about that when I was mentioning personal experience and lessons, but when they're able to see themselves in the content and in the work that you're doing, they're more likely to engage in it and feel like they can share and they can engage and really be part of the learning as well. They're not just sitting in the backseat, but they're really able to take charge and contribute to that space as well, which is amazing. And finally, community connection. We've talked about that throughout, and how amazing, how much success you have when your community is truly involved. So thank you for sharing all of your successes as well. I'm going to pivot this a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the barriers or obstacles that you've encountered. And I think we've seen and we've heard a few of those from the last few sessions. And so what are some things that maybe you're still facing, you're still thinking about in terms of your own experience? Feel free to put that in the chat again. I'm going to try to do my best to summarize what I'm seeing so that everyone has a chance to hear from everyone. Yeah, we might be afraid to say the wrong thing. For sure. Yeah, can definitely hold us back if we're not sure of the content or the knowledge. Getting permission. Yeah, we know that institutional barriers can be a big thing. Just getting those permissions to go out or to be in a different place that's your classroom and is this four walls. And having the money, yeah. So maybe you get the permission, it's okay to go, but where is the funding coming from? Yeah. Yeah, having the support. If you're talking about some traumatic events, or if trauma comes up for individuals in the classroom, yeah. Yeah, funding for sure. Not knowing who to go to or find local knowledge, and engage with elders in your area. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of similar themes for sure, incorporating traditions and protocols. Yeah. Yeah, so the big thing is knowing where to engage with others, for sure. Okay, yeah, so this is some of the things that Alicia and I thought of that we've experienced, as well as we've all talked about our personal confidence and our experiences. So that for sure can feel like a barrier to us. We want to make sure we're engaging in a really meaningful way. So that can start us off for sure. And there's also, that kind of leads into training and professional development. If you maybe don't have necessarily the time in your school year, or you don't know where to ask for professional development or long-term trainings, that can feel like another barrier as well, scheduling those times. Yeah. There is curriculum barriers, as we talked about. There is a lot of curriculum, and sometimes it can feel like you're rushing to get through curriculum. And so in order to really start from a place of Indigenous knowledge, you might feel like that's a lot of time to really get all of that knowledge that you want in the way that you want it out. So recognizing that timing is a thing as well, and doing all that you want to get done, and making sure that you have good connections to curriculum outcomes, instead of just trying to make it fit, really starting with that community, that faith-based knowledge first. Yeah. Finally, resource credibility and access. So knowing where to find resources, knowing who to go to can be a struggle and a barrier as well. And I've seen a lot of that in the chat. And that I think also comes with financial barriers. So if your institution, financial is not there, that can also be difficult to know where to go. And as I mentioned, Kathy mentioned institutional barriers of funding. So, if folks need to be paid properly, and we want to make sure we're compensating them appropriately for their time and all of their experience, but not being able to pay them on time, that can definitely be a barrier as well. So there are lots of things, and hopefully today we can talk about some of those. And I see lots of great conversation in the chat as well to kind of talk about some of those things. So I'm going to follow this up. I think this is our last question, and then we'll get into another section for us here. But what resource have you found helpful? So what are things that have been really helpful in supporting you in creating any of this work or doing this in your classroom? Yeah, things that have been great and helpful for you. I'd love to hear it in the chat. Yeah, so seeing still to talk about barriers and accessing the barrier. Yeah. Yeah, so still I'm seeing a few of the barriers coming in, and parents as well can be a barrier too if they're expecting to learn specific curriculum and you're trying to incorporate different ways of learning, that can be different for them as well. But yeah, so engaging with coworkers and building that relationship and having them come into your classroom if they're knowledge cube as well, that's amazing. Yeah, videos can be really helpful. That can help bring some different experiences into the classroom, and maybe you're not able to go somewhere else. Yeah, local artists, children, families in the community. Someone specifically mentions Inhabit Media. Yeah, they're great as well. We use them. And that's an awesome resource as well. Someone's mentioning the guide for this session has been really resourceful, and I agree. It's a wonderful guide that you folks put together. There's a few specific books that are being shared, increasing your relationship with learning. Yeah, so some schools have an elder who works directly with the school, which is really amazing. I know not all schools or all school boards have that, but maybe seeking out if your school does, or if your school board has any of those relationships established that you can continue on. Good Minds is another resource as well. Yeah. Yeah, so lots of great resources coming in. We're going to share a few that we have found helpful as well. So first and foremost, of course, if you are able to engage and build relationships with Indigenous experts and knowledge keepers, that is obviously what we all strive for, and we want to be able to engage those and build those relationships. I think the key piece there is really being able to listen and build that relationship. And as part of it, we've already mentioned, is making sure that you are properly and fairly compensating them for their time, whether that's engaging in proper elder protocol and making sure that they're being paid on time, and what's expected in that, so that you can maintain that relationship and also make sure that their time is valued in more ways than just your appreciation. There's lots of books that have been shared and lots of online readers as well. A few books that we have really enjoyed, which are great for a number of different ways. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmer. Definitely recommend it to anyone, even if, depending, no matter what grade, whatever you teach, it's a great book for anyone. It really does an amazing job of connecting Indigenous knowledge of her and her knowledge with some Western STEM and understanding specifically around botany and biology. Bridging Cultures, Scientific and Indigenous Ways of Knowing is by Glenn Aikenhead and Herman J. Mitchell. And this is a really great book specifically looking at a classroom setting, or not a classroom setting, but a school, and teaching and education and educating youth on understanding that connection between STEM and Indigenous knowledge. And then the last book is specifically looking at land-based learning, so land-based education by Herman J. Mitchell as well, specifically looks at how land-based education can play out. And he walks us through a few examples of his experience in land-based education, specifically looking at the Cree seasonal cycle. So talking through how he used the cycle to have land-based education throughout the year, and kind of how that worked for him, and some of the lessons and teachings that he was able to pass on. So those are 3 books. I'm seeing lots of other books in the chat. So if you have a chance, write them down, or maybe you can copy those out. And then also community programs. So I've seen people talking about connecting with their community. There's different programs within their community, different elders that they have been able to connect to, which is really amazing. And then also the school board district. Somebody mentioned an elder that works for the school. So being able to engage with them if they're already in your school board, and create those relationships and hopefully have them into your classroom, or come out onto the land, and they can be part of your classroom in that way. So other thing I want to mention is there's also a lot of talk of collaborating with educators, and just as we're being mindful of our knowledge keeper and our elders' time and conversations, we also want to make sure that we're being mindful of our educators. You might be collaborating, working together, but being really mindful of their time and making sure that you are also engaging with them in a way and that is appropriate for both of you, and that they also have the capacity to engage in the way that you are expecting from them. So just some of those gentle reminders, but I think there's lots of resources, and thank you to everyone who's sharing in the chat. There's so many things in here, and I'm trying to remember some of those and write those down as well. So I really appreciate it. All right, so we're going to kind of transition into how we as an outreach team look at our content process and how we start to bridge this knowledge. As we talked about, we really try to start from a place of place-based and community knowledge first, and then look at where we can make those STEM connections in. We want to always start with that Indigenous knowledge, that local relevant content before anything else. So thanks, folks.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Naomi. So for this next section, I'm going to work through some of the resources and templates that we've used in the past to build our content. And these will be accessible for you after as well, if you download the slides. So we're going to take the opportunity to kind of chat through some of the theory of it, and then you'll have an opportunity to see some examples that the outreach team has done in the past, and we'll have a chance to walk through that as well. So looking at the content process and how we bridge knowledge. So the first activity that I kind of want to walk you through is called the community map. So community mapping is an activity. Oh, sorry, actually. So just walking through some of the questions that we want to think about when we're making STEM culturally relevant. So you want to look at the different tools that you already have that you can start with. So we're going to share a few of the tools that we've used in the past and actively with you today. And then also thinking about some of the other tools and resources you have access to, things that have been successful in the past, or maybe new tools and resources that you're looking for. Also looking in which ways you can incorporate soft skills and not just the subject specific skills is also an excellent way to incorporate, especially land-based education. So looking at those human skills like collaboration and observation, teamwork, some of those more soft human skills instead of only focusing on the subject matter. Also looking at your community resources, looking at the different people you can reach out to. We chatted about this quite a bit in the previous section. So looking into elders and knowledge keepers, making sure you're engaging in the appropriate protocols and being mindful of their time and their capacity. And then building and developing those relationships so that you can have a long-term relationship with knowledge holders and elders and other community members who hold on to this knowledge. And then also looking at the voices that are being represented in your lesson. So this kind of moves into the fifth point as well. So making sure that you're using local and relevant examples, that the content that you're providing for the youth is meaningful to them, and that they also have opportunity to share their own stories and experiences and really engage with the content. And the more community and based and locally relevant the content is, the easier it'll be to create those experiences for students. So one of the ways we like to look at place-based learning is by building a community map. So it's a thought exercise, and it's an opportunity to look at all of the different relationships that exist around you. So when we do community mapping, you can do it with participants, or you can also do it yourself as an educator. So the idea is to look at your community and then try to think of all the different things that are around you. So looking at all of the different STEM you might see, looking at the different ways that the community uses STEM, looking at the places of learning. So the different places where people learn in your community, and then who those people are. Where does knowledge in your community come from? Thinking about your favorite places, places that are important to you, places that are important to the community, places that are culturally important. And then also looking at where you see Indigenous knowledge. And it's really important when you do this question with students is that you let them approach Indigenous knowledge from where they're at. So not trying to define it, but letting them share their own experiences and stories around Indigenous knowledge. And then that's true for us as educators as well. Trying not to completely define it, but to approach it from where we're at as we slowly develop a deeper understanding of it over time. So the next slide has a finished community map. So we looked at science in this community, and you'll see all sorts of different places that have been placed on the map. You can see natural structures such as the forest and the campground, taking a look at the ocean or the river that's nearby, looking at the lakes and the land. You can incorporate weather. You can look at the sky as well. You can think about all the different animals and plants that are around your community. And then also looking at the human structures as well. So the buildings, the infrastructure in your community, the roads and different things like that. And once you've kind of established all those different components, that's when you can start kind of pulling the STEM out of the community. So taking a look at where science happens, whether you're looking at biology related to the plants and the water, or maybe you're looking at chemistry and you're doing water testing. You can look at the electricity. You can take a look at engineering and look at the different buildings. You can look at different Indigenous technologies. And then really drawing out also like where both youth and adults are learning in the community. Where does knowledge come from? And once you've done this, this is a really great thing you can do with your students and allow them to share their own knowledges and experiences, especially if you're a teacher who's just coming into a community and don't have a lot of that knowledge. And then it's also a great opportunity for lesson planning. You can use this community map to draw out some of those different aspects of the community that you might be able to connect curriculum to. So you'll notice on the edges there, we have some lesson plans and we've drawn specific topics to some of the different pieces. So when we're looking at our community, we want to look at the different aspects of Indigenous knowledge that we see. And the circle isn't in any way meant to be fully encompassing. We've just named some of the aspects that we've identified. And then it's always important to make sure that you're thinking about other things as well that you might not be thinking about, some other aspects of Indigenous knowledge that other people might know. So this definitely isn't, it's meant to be a starting place. So you can look at the different structures in the environment. You can look at navigation and transportation, medicines and healing, food and harvesting, arts, math, language, ceremonies and teachings. So there's lots of different aspects that you can look at. And once you've started to identify some of those aspects that are important to the community and also to the youth, that's when you can start making some of those curriculum connections. So on the next slide, we've filled it out a little bit, some potential connections. So for structures and environment, you can look at wigwams, you can look at squat lodges, medicines and healings. You can look at some of the different medicines and plants that are used in your community, how things are harvested, the type of food that's eaten. There's a lot of environmental sustainability as well. An example I like to think about is the Inuit Tikanagan. So you can look at structures and environment, and you can look at the Tikanagan, how it's built, how it's been used traditionally, and how it's designed. You could also look at it as a navigation and a transport device, right? So using the common tech to go across the land and transport goods, but also looking at food and harvesting. How is the wood harvested? Are there any traditional practices around the components of the Tikanagan or the common tech and how it's assembled? And then looking at the birch bark canoe as well, there's lots of connections to structure and environment, navigation. You can look at ceremonies and teachings around harvesting and then the harvesting itself as well. So there's lots of opportunities to pull different aspects of Indigenous knowledge and start to think about how you could link those to curriculum. But it's really important to start from the ground up and focus on the cultural connections instead of trying to force fit a cultural connection into the STEM topic. We want to make sure that it's place-based and locally relevant first, and then we want to try to make that curriculum connection afterwards. So moving into our next slide. So this is looking at the various aspects of Indigenous knowledge that we looked at on our last resource. And now we have an opportunity to think about those actual subjects and units that we might want to link and connect to the various pieces. So we can look at structures and environment, and maybe we think about forces and physics. So maybe we're hoping that we can focus in on an Indigenous invention like the teepee and look at how it's constructed. We can look at navigation and transportation, and we could focus on star stories. If you just pop the next slide up, Naomi. Looking at navigation and star stories, you can connect that to planetary science.
Okay, this would be cool.
So there's lots of potential connections there, and we're starting with those place-based cultural connections at the start, and then we're aligning it with curriculum. So you can look at the chemistry or the biology. You can pull in health topics to explain medicinal plants. And these opportunities are all across the curriculum. It's just a matter of thinking about how you'd like to build out your lessons and integrate them successfully. So at this point, I'd like to, I know I maybe went through that a little quick, but so if anyone has any questions, and now's a good time if you just want to quickly ask about any of those resources that I just shared with you. And they will be available in the PDF, and you can take a look at the slide deck if you want to use these in your classrooms. So happy to take a quick moment for questions, and then we can move on to our content showcase where hopefully you'll see some of it kind of come together in the activities that we've designed. Okay. Awesome. It looks like everybody's good, so I think we're okay to move on. You're just muted, Naomi.
Thank you. So as Alicia mentioned, we're going to go over some of the content that as an outreach team we've created, and just to give you an idea of something and some connections that maybe you can see as well. So as I mentioned, we're going to briefly go through it, so it's definitely not enough time to gain a full understanding, but the slide deck we will share in this chat closer to the end, and you'll have access to more in-depth understanding of this content. So you can go back if there's any ones that were really interesting or that you wanted a closer look at and read them then. But while we're talking about these activities, and then even while you're reflecting on them later, we really want you to think about what are the strengths and weaknesses to these activities. We know that there's definitely always ways that we can improve. So we'd love, if you see something and you think like this is some of the way we can make this even better, we'd love to hear it, or what maybe it looks like a strength to you in these activities. And then what would you change about the activity? It doesn't necessarily have to be a weakness that you would change, but maybe there's something you could see that you can improve upon. How would you improve upon it? Or what would you change? Like, do you know if there's something that would work really well in your classroom? Or maybe like there are a few that we're going to cover that have tech in them. So maybe the tech isn't appropriate for your classroom, or it's not available to you. Think just in general how you would adapt it to your classroom. That's the final question, is what aspects would you incorporate into your classroom? So maybe there's something about the activity that you really like, but you want to incorporate into a completely different set of knowledge. So lots of things to think about, and I'll go through these with you right now. So the first thing we're going to look at is tech in the environment. So I'm going to share two different activities. This first activity was designed for a grade 3 to 4 age range. And both the activities that were designed with tech in mind were really focused on understanding harvesting practices, migration, and hunting practices, as well as the use of technology. So how has Indigenous knowledge been used to understand migration patterns and herding and changes in the environment? And how is technology used to understand those things? And how do they work together to really give us a full picture? And how has that changed throughout time? And how has that changed, especially as we begin to see the climate and our land changing with climate change? So that is kind of the framework that we started these with. And the first activity was exploring habitats with spheros. So this was designed for communities in Nunavut. We looked at the Arctic fox. So using a sphero, which acted as a drone or a robotic camera or device, that they were able to do some observations of Arctic foxes without actually, interacting with them. We talked about what that would mean and how technology is useful in those settings. And then we also talked about what habitat is and how habitats are changing. So it was a way to introduce climate change in some of those conversations about the changing environment into a younger audience and age range. And then with that sphero, with that tech, we were also able to introduce some coding and some basic math and measurement as well. So that is for our 3 to 4 range. And then the other activity that I want to share that also follows this migration and hunting theme is Where Are You Caribou? So this activity was actually developed in partnership with a teacher in Fort McMurray. And he was doing a unit on moose hunting and harvesting and wanted an accompanying lesson to look at GPS, tracking, navigation, both the technology that's being used, but also Indigenous ways of knowing in some of those areas. So this is the activity that we collaborated with. And like I mentioned earlier, it was really to understand the Indigenous knowledge and ways to hunt and track, and also technology and how the two complement each other and work together in harvesting or hunting and tracking moose. This is activities called Where Are You Caribou? So we were able to adapt some of these things into the caribou population and caribou areas. And it's also been updated for buffalo as well. Although buffalo don't necessarily migrate those areas, we were able to incorporate some of those themes into our activities. So again, like our younger age range, we were able to have lots of conversations about human impact and climate change and the different effects that are currently going on in the areas of these animals and how that might affect migration, how that affects our own practices of how we hunt and track these animals. So shifting directions a little bit, we are going to talk about some lab skills on land. So these activities were developed for high school age ranges for land camp specifically, but they could be used in a number of settings, ideally on the land though, for sure. So I see vitamin C, they looked at first and foremost the importance of our diet and nutrition. So specifically looking in at vitamin C and vitamin C prevalence on the land and in various plants and fruits that are local to your area. So in this activity, participants would gather some berries or a local fruit if it was in season, and they would do a simple titration of vitamin C. So we were able to see with using iodine, a simple color change to determine the concentration of vitamin C. And there's more specifics on how that works if you're interested in those resources that I mentioned at the bottom of these slides. And from this kind of lab skills, we were able to have a lot of conversations about diets, being on the land and the land providing us nutrients that we need. And there's a lot of really amazing sharing for how those nutrients come about. So not just talking about the fruits, but what other plants provide us nutrients, what parts of the animals provide us different nutrients, and how do we gain that knowledge. So this is a really great activity and lots of opportunity. Even in the first activity, there's lots of opportunity for engagement with elders, knowledge holders, other educators, community members who are actively on the land as well to share in this knowledge. And then the last activity that I'd like to share is our beating molecules activity. So this activity can be done with a wide range of individuals. And this activity I think is really cool because we are able to talk about the connection of all things on the land, but at a really microscopic level when we're talking about DNA. So students first talk about DNA, we talk about what DNA is and the structure of DNA and really how it is the molecule of life and it connects all of us together. And then they do a fun lab skill where they extract their own DNA using their cheek. I don't know if anyone's done that, or you scrape your cheek and you do a few reactions to get your DNA. So that is a really great opportunity for them to have an even greater understanding of what DNA is. But then they get to do an arts activity and a STEAM activity where they build a double helix model using beads to represent the phosphate backbone and then the base pairs. So there's two different ways that we did this, depending on like dexterity levels, time levels, all the different factors that go into deciding what materials you're going to use. So pipe cleaners and large craft beads, or wire and seed beads and pony beads, which you can get at local craft stores or indigenous beading stores. So this activity really works well for all audiences. And I think the big piece of this is being able to connect all of life through something so small as DNA, which we don't often think about when we're talking about being on the land, for sure. So those are just some of the activities, and that was a really brief introduction into all of them. But I think one of the really big things I want to stress is how all these activities lend to a lot of conversation and a lot of ability to bring in different individuals. For the beading activity, you can have folks that work on a molecular level come in and speak, but you can also have artists, individuals who work on the land come in and talk, and there's lots of room for knowledge to be shared and even more conversation to be generated.
And that's a fantastic point that you just made there, Stephanie. I really like referring to activities as experiences, because really they are, and they provide opportunity for continued learning after. So I really appreciate that thought. That's fantastic. So moving on to kind of like another STEM topic that we can approach is engineering in the design cycle. So this is a very open-ended topic when you're looking at engineering and design and building things. So I want everyone to kind of think about a way that you could incorporate the engineering design cycle to create a culturally relevant lesson or experience. What types of aspects of Indigenous culture do you see that you might be able to connect to engineering or design? So looking at the design cycle, so defining a problem, ideating a solution, building and designing a prototype, testing that prototype, and then also that empathy connection, which really does come in at every stage of the process. So looking at your user, looking at your audience, the person that's going to be using the device or tool, how is this going to affect them, and how is it going to be a positive outcome for them? So I want to give everyone a moment to kind of think about some possible connections, and then you can share them in the chat. And I think I was quite choppy before, so I'm just going to keep my video off for now to make sure that I'm not cutting in and out. So trying to think of aspects of Indigenous culture that we can connect to engineering and design.
In response in the chat, talking about buoyancy, canoe, constructing structures out of cardboard boxes or using other recycled materials. Yeah, it's a great connection for sure, Lloyd. Thank you for sharing. Water filtration. Yeah, that's another one for sure. Talking about climate change. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Shelter construction, yeah. Not using natural resources that you're finding outside, agricultural farming methods, definitely. Yeah, constructing igloo, transportation, can use snowshoes, talking about alternative fuel sources. So how can we mitigate climate emissions? Yeah.
And these are all really fantastic ideas. And I really like that some of the ideas that have come out of this aren't like things that you necessarily like build right in front of you. Some of them are more conceptual ideas, like trying to use the design cycle to solve climate change or to improve environmental sustainability.
Yeah. I think
I really like, yeah.
I think Julia's comment, you're reading our minds a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like inquiry into past, present, and future innovations as well. Fantastic. So an activity that we designed focused on the Tikanagan, which is an infant carrier. So we wanted to focus on Indigenous innovation, and we explored the design, the engineering design cycle and process. So we started by kind of looking at the form and the function of the Tikanagan. So looking at what it's made of, locally harvested materials, leather, sinew, and wood, and then looking at how it functioned. So it was an infant carrier, but it had many uses as well. So it was super mobile, so it could go out on the land with the parent and the child. It also really helped build that familial and paternal bond. So keeping the child with you at all times, that sense of security through the lacing and the leather that makes the child feel secure. And then we also looked at other baby carriers. So we looked at an Inuit Amauti, which is a garment which has space in the hood for the child so that the child can be right up against the parent. And then we also looked at other more modern kind of car seats and strollers. And the idea was for them to look at aspects of all of these different designs of different baby carriers over time, and then trying to build an innovative new infant carrier. And it wasn't really about making something better. It was about making something new or different. So really focusing in on those actual functions of the device and then deciding where to go from there. So that's an example of an Indigenous innovation that we made connections to. And yeah, that's a great point, Jennifer. It doesn't have to be like new, it just necessarily has to be different.
Awesome. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you a few other structures and models that we have designed activities around, and we're kind of want to do a really quick kind of rapid fire brainstorm of any ideas that you can think of right away when you see or you hear these specific items. So our first structure is a teepee. So anything that comes to your mind kind of right away when you hear this, that you think of connections that you would be able to make to your classroom, or things that you know your students would be able to connect to.
And think of this as like a super quick jam session. Just throw ideas in the chat as they come.
Yeah, heat conservation, airflow, for sure. Those are big ones and ones that we've explored too. Geometry, yeah, structure and design, warmth, yeah. Yeah, community stormproofing. Aerodynamics, yeah, that is a really big one that I didn't realize until I looked more into the teepee, of how aerodynamic a teepee is, and kind of the amazing design of it. Climate, yeah. There's lots. Okay, so I thought this was gonna be rapid fire, forces to keep balance. I'm gonna move on to our next one. And I promise there's a reason why this is so rapid fire. Yeah, surface area, surroundings, so many. So our next one is the Kamatix. This is an Inuit dog sled. These photos are courtesy of some of our other outreach instructors who took photos while they were on the road. So what are some things that come out of this for you off the top of your head? So I think migration, transportation, friction, climate change for sure, food and survival. Yeah, friction again, caring for animals. Yeah, might not necessarily be the actual like commentary that you talk about it, but something that's linked to it that you think about. Minimizing carbon footprint, hunting, velocity, transportation, innovation. Yeah, these are all amazing. Perfect. So I'm gonna, yeah, efficiency. Yeah, awesome. All right, so I have another one for us. It is the birch bark canoe. So what are our thoughts here? Anything else? This is our last one. Buoyancy, yeah. Materials that we're using, exploration, water systems. Yeah, that's a really, really good one. Sustainability. balance. Yes. Migration. Awesome. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of like navigation and sustainability, load harvesting techniques. Yeah, that's a big one. Sewing for sure. Hunting and fishing, art and nature. Yeah, all the designs are also just so beautiful themselves that they're art. Cordage, yeah, use of resin, depends on the materials, textiles. Yeah, so lots of different thoughts, and I really appreciate for you guys, all 30 folks, for going through those so quickly, because we want to give you an opportunity now to have a bit of time in a breakout room, and we want to give you an opportunity to start talking about some of these ways maybe you can implement designs and concepts into your classroom. So we would like you to pick one of these structures within your room. You know, if you want to do more than one, great. I will not limit you at all. But we would definitely start off with one as a group and decide maybe how you would incorporate this and what themes you would pull out and what lessons and experiences, I think it's definitely that you would use to kind of start building up this experience. So I'm going to put everyone into breakout rooms. If you don't want to go, that is totally fine. You can stay and hang out in this chat, but we're going to give you about just after 2. So we'll give you till almost just around 2:15 to start coming up with kind of an idea or an experience or lesson that you would create using one of these activities. If you do not want to do one of these 4, and as a group you have some other theme that has sparked since we've all started chatting, by all means, I'm not going to hold you back again, please do so, but this is just to get you started.
And Naomi, before you do, because I'm going to jump off here, I'm going to put in the teacher's toolkit into the chat here for everybody, and you will see, folks, that the teacher's toolkit provides you with some of the templates and some of the processes that both Naomi and Alicia were describing to you earlier. And then the toolkit goes a little bit more in depth on the content alignment and processes that you would use, you know, should you be bringing this into the classroom. So we offer that to you as a tool moving forward when you go into your own areas. So I'll drop that in there now, and then I'm going to jump off. But enjoy the rest of your session. Thanks
Doug. I am also going to put in the slide deck for you as well. If you would like to look at that, you should have that soon. So bear with me as I put these in the break rooms. Anyone has any questions or anything, please feel free to ask as well. Okay, so I'm going to automatically assign you. If you have any questions, please stick around to ask. If not, we'll see you in about 15 minutes. So I guess not about 20 after, and then hopefully some time to share and hear from folks as well.
Yeah, we definitely love to hear your ideas. So if you're comfortable volunteering for your group, then definitely go for it.
Oh, and one last thing before I sign off on some of the challenges that Naomi and Alicia were talking about, and that you identified with funding and getting it into your schools and those kind of things. Our role as an organization, as a nonprofit, working with Indigenous communities, schools, school boards, teachers, is to help support the development of the in-STEM land-based modeling. So, you know, if you have an interest in having a conversation with us, you know, moving forward about how to bring this into your school, how can we line you up with our local network members in your region of the country, feel free to reach out to me. And certainly I'm open to having that conversation on how we can help you to bring the in-STEM model into your school.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. I can also put your email in the chat as well for folks to access. All right, so hopefully you're able to join a breakout room and engage in those conversations. I think there should be a notification for everybody up there. If there's not, let me know. Awesome. Yeah, I think I see another hand up. Do you have a question? You can unmute yourself or turn your camera.
You had a question for us, Susie?
Hi there.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for today's session. I'm sorry, I'm in a location that doesn't make it conducive for a breakout room today. But I did have a question. So first of all, can you hear me? I just want to make sure that you can hear me. Okay.
Yeah, you're clear.
These activities look fabulous. This is the part that I'm always stuck on. So at my school, I'm with the York Region District School Board, and we all have Indigenous, every school is supposed to have an Indigenous education designate, which is kind of a person who is, what is that, like a go-between with our Indigenous, like our FNMI team and teachers to kind of provide support and guidance. I'm not Indigenous, but I'm an ally and I'm very passionate about it. And I've taken a lot of workshops. And a few years ago, I took a workshop where we were strongly encouraged not to touch, literally it was in these words, not to touch culture. And we've been spending a lot of time at school and our school board, like telling teachers not to do teepees and wigwams and things like that. And I'm a little bit torn on that. And I'm wondering, is it because maybe this is because it's the science part of it, as opposed to most teachers were doing it as out of social, as social studies level. I'm at an elementary school, so I'm kind of torn. I don't know if what I'm saying, you've experienced that before. I just want to make sure that I'm guiding my teachers. And I'm always happy to ask questions from our Indigenous education team, but I'm curious about your approach on it too, or your take on it.
Maybe Naomi, I can
Doug, before I
jump on. And I appreciate that, Susie. And I'll tell you, there's been a lot of, over the years, different kind of commentary and approaches on this. And when somebody says, don't touch culture, from my perspective, unfortunately, it has created an environment where, teachers don't want to go near anything that even has the word Indigenous in it. And that is an unfortunate result of the way that these things have been communicated. I think from our perspective and from my perspective specifically, I've been involved. I've been an educator for 30 years and an Indigenous educator with, a significant background in working in communities with communities. And so what we're talking about here is the recognition of Indigenous knowledge is first, and those folks that are non-Indigenous to view it from the perspective of that Indigenous people have always known about STEM and have valuable contributions to it through the Indigenous knowledges themselves. So when presenting something like this, like these kits here, we have these kits. The background on these kits is that they're harvested from an Indigenous artisan. His videos are attached to it, and he speaks to them specifically from his knowledge base. And so, I'm of the opinion that, some folks have done us a disservice by saying to all people, don't touch Indigenous. And what I interpret that is not to try and interpret Indigenous worldviews or Indigenous ways of knowing, rather look to local people to provide you with that kind of support. But you as an educator have a responsibility to bring Indigenous knowledges into your classroom, not as an expert, but as somebody that recognizes the value, importance of Indigenous knowledges alongside, in this case, STEM. And so, it's really been, there have been some people that have tried to, like academia over the years, have tried to present from an Indigenous perspective or Indigenous, this is how it is for Indigenous people. And that's really, I believe, what people are saying when they say don't touch Indigenous, right? And it's been, I will stand up in any room and say that we're doing ourselves a disservice by telling teachers not to even talk about Indigenous culture, right? Certainly historical timeline stuff can be be found in any library. But when it comes to story and meaning, those are the areas that you would want to stay away from, right? But, you know, something like this, you know, like these kits, I mean, you know, the ideal way to approach it is, you know, from the perspective of the Tikanagan, let's say the last one, you know, it's something that's very visible to everybody. Now, if you can find somebody in the York Region School Board that knows about the Tikanagan and present that alongside the STEM content, then everybody wins, you know?
Yes, yeah.
And so
I think that's what I think it's such a learning curve. But I think if I'm understanding or grasping this properly, I think it all needs to go with like the intent. So I'm thinking back. So for teachers who used to do, I think what was it in grade 2 or 3? I teach English and math in a French immersion school, so I don't even teach social studies, but I incorporate a lot of social justice in my language curriculum. But I'm thinking that maybe what teachers have been doing before is because it was on with social studies and what is the intent of recreating a wigwam. Yeah. Whereas there's probably no intent, like no real strong knowledge base to that. Whereas with science, with STEM here, this is an understanding of how things worked as opposed to just kind of recreating something that used to be. Or am I on the right track?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, like I said, with each of these items here, you know, like there are stories and as Naomi was saying, right, there are practices that go with each of these. Those are the things that you as a teacher don't want to go. And even I would be hesitant to go down some of the roads on things that I'm not familiar with. So it's not just Indigenous, but the TP itself, there are stories that go with, you know, the number of poles that go in it, the direction that the door is placed, you know, the harvesting of the hides. So that's when you want to complement the STEM with somebody that is knowledgeable in that area. So it's really utilizing both sets of knowledge, right? And not being the expert in one or the other. You're either talking about the STEM and the sciences, and then having that supported by an Indigenous person that is familiar with the canoe or the Tikanagan or the Kumatuk or whatever aspect of culture you're presenting in the classroom.
Okay. And if you're not able to either invite an elder based on, you know, availability, or the cost issues always comes up, would a video to support that? So like from an Indigenous community or an elder, would that be okay? Would that be appropriate?
I personally would say yes. Like with these four items here, we have them, they're all supported by a video and a narrative by the artisan that built them, and the cultural component that goes. So we make sure that although, you know, like we've provided a whole teacher's resource package to go with these kits, and videos from the actual artisan, right? So, I mean, you know, it's a delicate situation, but for me personally, we lose too much by not demonstrating, at least showing youth that Indigenous people have these high knowledges of STEM. They live within these cultural practices. And by saying, as you said earlier, intent, it is not your intent to tell the history or the stories behind these, but merely to demonstrate that there is high levels of STEM associated with the harvesting, building, and use of these cultural items.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You really helped clarify these questions in my head and given me a lot of understanding on how to approach this. I'm very excited to look into these kits. Thank you again for your time.
And just on another note with your school board, you know, and I hear this all the time about cost and everything. Schools, you know, if they are committed and school boards are committed, then their dollars and resources should be available to bring this kind of learning into the classroom, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that is something from, I don't know if it was in last week's session or the session before where that was mentioned as part of Truth and Reconciliation. We have to find the money for this, right? If we can find it for textbooks and gym equipment and everything, we have to find it for this as well.
Well, when I was, I mean, I know for in Canada or in Ontario, there's $1,750. That was the last number I knew anyway. $1,750 that follows every Indigenous student every year that is earmarked to go towards cultural activities or cultural learning. And you know, those dollars often disappear in the black holes of the school board, but those dollars are there and people need to be aware of that. And if your school is not, you know, got language or something in there, ask the question, where are the cultural dollars that are associated with the Indigenous students that I have? Because it should be there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for your for
My
sharing
pleasure.
that knowledge with me. That really helps clarify a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Anyone else with any other questions or anything they want to share? We'll give folks in breakout rooms another minute or two, and then I'll bring them back in for sharing and discussion.
I have a question. I'm Angela. Big piece for those of us who are non-Indigenous but are really interested and feel invested, like feel our own, like feel compelled to, you know, take up this work. That question of that word like misappropriation is such a you know, it's daunting to those of us who want to do this, but don't, yeah, we're worried about doing it in a poor way. Like a lot of what you've said is already helping me to sort out that piece, but I don't know. I wondered if you could speak to that a bit.
So,
I think what you just said did kind of talk about that, but if I don't know, there's still a lot of concern on like teachers really do want to take up this work, but again, a question of it is like knowing how to do it in a good way. And so much of what you've done in these past several sessions has helped kind of myself anyway, kind of wrangle with that question, but I still would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Doug, did you
I
want to
think
speak
that's
to anything?
when the intentionality piece really comes into it.
It's Tammy. I can share a little bit about cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's a really excellent questions, very valid and appropriate questions to ask, especially around the content, bringing in tradition, culture into the classroom. And as a non-Indigenous person, like I'm Indigenous myself, but I communicate with a lot of non-Indigenous people, teachers, educators, and they have the exact same questions. And my approach to this is for the cultural appropriation. We want to make sure that we research the culture. We want to make sure we have all the information like aligned with what we're teaching. So that's including connecting with knowledge keepers, elders, Indigenous students, anyone from the community that what you're trying to teach. Maybe it's teepees, maybe it's a Tucanagan. So I'll just use the Tucanagan for an example. So perhaps you can invite a family, a parent into the classroom that uses the Tucanagan or have used one, or traditionally their family has used one. So you're getting permission to teach it with the support of the knowledge keepers and community members that use this as a part of their culture. And also with the permission of doing that, you want to acknowledge where it comes from. So you're acknowledging the history behind it, the intent, the purpose, etc. You want to align those up to make sure that we're not just appropriating it. Appropriating would be like, okay, this is a Tucanagan, we're bringing it into the classroom, this is what Indigenous peoples have used, and not really acknowledging the culture behind it, basically. So I think like bottom line is permission to use it, getting support from the community Indigenous members, and then giving credit to the Indigenous peoples as well.
And further to what Tammy just said, like with that research and the acknowledgement or the knowledge, having the knowledge, the personal knowledge, in the past, this stuff has been taught as this is Indigenous or this is Indian, and it applies to all four of these items here have regional and cultural significance and difference. They're not, you know, homogeneous to all Indigenous people, right? So that understanding that these cultural aspects of culture are localized, like the teepee has really very little relevance in from the Ontario perspective, right? In its current form, it's more of a plains dwelling, right? So those kind of knowledge bases only add to your intent and how it's interpreted by anyone that may view it as a cultural appropriation.
I have a question, Doug. So I work with an elder, a couple of elders, and do some programming. And one of the things that I always do after I've been taught something, if I am responding to it again in a different form without my elder present, I say, as I was taught, or as I was shown, or as I was given the knowledge of. So at what point can I use the knowledge that I've been gifted from my elders or from people around me that are knowledge keepers, and use that without having to acknowledge all the rest of it? At what point can I do that as a non-Indigenous person?
I mean, you know, it's typically, and I'm just gonna, from my experience, like these knowledges or gifts or things, these teachings are given to you, and then it's usually the community that gives you the rights to use that knowledge, and it's a non-documented kind of process, and so it's hard to say that at any point in time you have the right to not acknowledge where that knowledge came from. I mean, even myself, like, you know, I always acknowledge that everything I know and have somebody else gave me, you know, and some things I'm allowed to do certain ceremonies. I'm allowed to do because I was given the right to do that through ceremony, right? So, but the knowledge itself, you should always acknowledge where it came from, always, regardless of, you know, status, right? Or regardless of, you know, how far down the road you go with that knowledge. It always came from somebody else, you know, and we build upon that. But certainly just out of, you know, respect, I would say you always would acknowledge it, right? Or those who gave it to you, whether or not you have the right to tell a certain story or perform a certain ceremony. You know, that you know, usually comes with a ceremony itself, right?
So then when I'm passing information on, that is what I'm doing then is correct by saying I've learned this from, or I've received this gift from that.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. This is how it was shown to me, right?
Perfect.
Can I ask like for a small example of something like that? Like
of what gift I would have been receiving. So working with an elder, we made snowshoes last year and talked about kind of the process and things like that. Then this year when I had the snowshoes, I said, as I have learned this and this, and some, you know, and elder had said this and elder had said that kind of thing. So in knowledge that I didn't have them present with me the next time we talked about them and had the snowshoe we made, but I talked about what the knowledge was and where it came from, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, like I've over the years kind of taken a position because the people that taught me always said to me, you know, or the main things that I've taken away, you know, Doug Everything I have, somebody else gave or taught me. You know, use what works for you and what you like and give it to somebody else. That's kind of, but it's when people get into presenting themselves as experts or turning it into things for economic benefit or personal benefit. That's when it really becomes the appropriation piece, right? And when people present it as their own knowledge, right? Again, there's a separation between sharing how to make a snowshoe and doing a walking out ceremony with snowshoes, right? You know, I mean, snowshoes weren't inclusive to Indigenous people.
Right. May I ask then, because I've been like, for something like doing a smudge, like personally, I feel that I mean, I've been present several times and, you know, it's been explained, but I don't think, even though it's a beautiful ceremony, I don't think I would be, like, I feel like that would be overstepping to say like, I'm going to do a smudge because this is what, you know, people like, do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like.
And again, that, like, you know, it depends what the context of the smudge is, right? So, you know, I always liken it to in churches, you know, not the best example, but, you know, all religions or all spiritual beliefs use incense. They all use it in different ways. And so if you're taught the smudge, that's one thing for you to use it on your own, right? To run a ceremony around the smudge, well, that's a very different thing.
Right.
But you know, in my opinion, you know, there's no, and the way that I was taught, right, is that these things belong to everybody, right? It's everybody's right. And if we as Indigenous people can share that smudge with other people, and then they in turn go home and do that smudge, to heal themselves and to help themselves, then we're all better off for that as human beings. So when you turn that into, you know, this is something that is mine. I mean, the plants don't belong to any one person.
So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is your intent and your sense of humility is what, I guess, ameliorates that sense of like crossing a cultural.
Yeah, and it's all attached to like all of the teaching, like it's all connected, right? So that's why I was saying there's a separation between, you know, things like smudging and actually running a ceremony around the smudge, and because all of those ceremonies have different elements, processes, components that are taught over years and years and years and earned rights, whereas the self utilizing that smudge is different, right? So you know, it really is a matter of, you know, really understanding, acknowledging, respecting, you know, the processes that go into anything that you do, that you're taught, and where the boundaries start and stop between, you know, the teachings and the protocols and ceremony that are given rights.
Yeah. Okay. Can I, if I may share, I don't want to take up too much time, but I have a parallel example. When my daughter was having her first communion, our family came, and my nephew, who was quite young, he was the priest was asking a question, and and he was like, I don't know. He just like said it aloud. And but then when it was time to go up for communion, then his mother was like, oh, can we just go up and get a piece of bread? And I was like, oh no, that would not be appropriate. And so I kind of have that sense of, there are parts of your ceremonies that of your culture that are like, there are certain areas that are Sorry, I just felt I had to share that. I know that.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. It's really, but that only comes like, that's why, you know, it's suggested that people don't just take this stuff and go out and start presenting it, right? Without, you know, having a clear understanding of, you know, the processes and the stops and starts on where, the intent can change. And so it's important that people do understand that, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. I think, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doug and Tammy, for answering those questions. Those are a really great discussion.
We still have a little bit of time. If anyone would like to share what they discussed in breakout rooms or put in the chat, that would be wonderful as well. But we're also open to kind of keeping this discussion going or other questions that folks might have to continue. So if anyone would like to share for breakout rooms, please feel free to share, turn on your mic, turn on your camera, post in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with, but also questions as well if that is something that you'd like just to talk further about.
Hi there. Our group talked about the possibility of doing something school-based. So if you were able to have an elder come in and discuss a TP or discuss a story about a TP, and then each grade or each class, science, social, would look at his story, the elder's story, or look at the TP and address it based on their knowledge and interests. So the math class would look at circumference and things like that. An art class would learn more about the drawings on the TP, and it would just go in different directions. And then it would be a school-based learning experience. And then it might also help to navigate the challenges financially or the obstacles of having an elder come in. Instead of going to each classroom, perhaps there'd be the option of doing it as a school-wide theme.
Awesome. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to take them, but so thank you all for joining today as well. It was wonderful to get to learn from you. I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And before I stop sharing my slides, I just want to show you at the end of this are the resources that we've mentioned. So kind of runs through the activities and some of the talking points that we had.
Oh, I see you have your hand up there, Jennifer.
I did. I just had one question, and it was just like this thought, and I don't know if this would be okay or not, but I really I can't say enough the framework slide, and then this one, I love it so much. It's ridiculous, because I just love the whole provocation of getting conversations started about that was like fast fire, rapid fire. How would you use that? I'm just loving the different perspectives of how people could come up with different ideas on how. Is this something that, because I just thought this would be so good for students to also just to garner what's their level of kind of what would they think that they could be using it? Would that be something that we could do a fast, the same sort of activity that you did with us, to have students do with it, to just kind of see what they're coming up, like a Mentimeter or something where we could save their answers? And then would that be okay to maybe then connect with an elder and say, this is what the kids were thinking, just to kind of give the elder or knowledge keeper insight as to where the students are coming from, just an information of, just to kind of give them background on where they're coming, just to see what did they think it could be used for, what could they be thinking of, and then what could they be thinking of after they've met with the elder and learned it different ways. I'm trying to think about the ways that we have some students who identify FNMI. We have some students obviously that don't. And I'm just trying to think of different ways that we can look at bridging the Western kind of ideas with Indigenous already understandings, and where do they differ, and then where do we see them coming together? So it's kind of like that comparing data pre and then afterwards and seeing where maybe things weren't so different, or maybe there were some really big differences and how people have come together just from a data analysis kind of, or understanding how maybe, you know, there were similarities and differences. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah,
definitely.
I think so. Do you want to chat, Naomi, or me?
Yeah, sure. My just initial thoughts were like, I think that there's definitely that you could go off this. I think my suggestion would be to look from local experiences and knowledge first. Like the structures that we pulled are, as Doug mentioned, are from all over. They're not specific to one group. So my suggestion would then be to look at what's local in your community, what is most relevant when doing something like that. But I think that it definitely would be a good opportunity and engaging. Maybe those elders can be in the room at that time as well, and they can all work together and engaging.
Oh, I love that. I love that, actually having them in the room too. I just think that the conversations, actual like genuine conversations that take place in the moment, I think are just so good. Not only that, it also just helps children find their voice and find their bravery to be courageous to ask. And I think that those are truly authentic. Those are really authentic questions. And oh, good. Oh, yes. Perfect.
I don't know, Tammy, if you have something to add to that as well. I see your hands up.
Hi. Yeah, my hand is up. Yeah. So Jennifer, I think that's an amazing idea. Getting the students to share their voice, getting them to brainstorm, to connect with each other. And then, you know, we want to hear what the children, the youth have to say, what their perspectives is. It acknowledges them, and then wrapping all that together, of course, by bringing in a knowledge keeper and elder to help support their learnings. I think that's a great idea.
Oh, good. Yay.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure. So I'm kind of trying to plan out next year and what things look like. I'm definitely going to have to get in contact with you offline because I have some other ideas that really these sessions have just got my brain going and thinking about how I can just find better ways to start new initiatives so that maybe haven't held before. So I have so many things to ask you about. And that was one of them. So
okay. And also I want to add that your classroom is your community, right? So you want to use your community, acknowledge the students and build that community within them. So whatever they want, what are they interested in? Are they curious? What's their natural inquiry? What do they want to learn about? Maybe they have things like interest about a particular part of a culture that they want to explore. And we, as educators, we may not know that, you know, until we engage them. So always look at your classroom, your students as a little community as well. Yes. Because they will bring so much information to the class for sure.
Are reading my mind. That is exactly half of what I would want to totally connect with you and ask you, but I think I have to like virtually connect because I can't even type it out. It's like, wait, it's a novel. It's much easier to talk about, and it's never been done before, so I would definitely love to connect with you afterwards. I'll send you an email, maybe there's a time, because that's exactly it. I want to like find out what they want to do. I want them to lead. And I'm just there to move the things out of the way to make sure that whatever they want to do, I'm just helping make happen.
Right, exactly. That's perfect. Yeah. Excellent. So connect with me for sure. We'll get that set up for sure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Does Deuce Christina have her hand up?
Yes, I do. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm on the highway. I'm off the road right now. And I just wanted to share with you our survivor, my aunt, Margaret Pullet, and what difference she's been making in our Mi'kma'ki. I'm from Mi'kma'ki in the district of Unama'ki, Cape Breton. And I was just coming from the mainland, going across the Cancel Causeway. But about 2 or 3 weeks ago, history was made in which we included a sign. It says, "Welcome to Cape Breton," but what we added was "Jilasi Unama'ki," and it's with our treaty education. She fought hard like against the government, and finally where we are at Nova Scotia, we're all treaty people. But what we do know, after we put this sign up, welcome to Unama'ki. And during our class today, we were just driving by, and I just wanted to acknowledge that when I crossed, we all crossed the bridge. So you're all welcome, Chilasi Unama'ki. And because we know from this that there's still a lot of teaching to be done, because there is a lot of negative comments, but we understand there's still a lot of teaching to be done in Nova Scotia, and understand that we're all treated people. And I just want to take this time to acknowledge my aunt, my survivor, and because she did it for all of us. And I just wanted to let you know that our class, we crossed the causeway all at the same time. And I just wanted to let you know that. And I love being in this class. So, Olalio, thank you. That's from Mi'kmaq.
Thank you
so much for sharing. That's amazing. Thank you so much. If there's any other questions, happy to hear them in the chat. There's one comment I also want to address. Someone was talking about, if I can find it here, talking about activities that can be run outdoors, specifically in like urban settings or park, city parks. I think that is a really great way to think about it too. You know, if there's a park close to you, that's a great way to get outdoors. And some of the activities we even talked about today. So, you know, can you take some of those things with you and take those materials and sit out at a park and still be connected outdoors in some spaces as well. Awesome. So there's no more questions. I think we'll turn it back to Tammy and Dakota, but we want to thank you all for listening, engaging with us, and sharing. I know I took a lot from you folks as well. So thank you so much. And again, if there's any other questions that come up, we'd be happy to answer them or continue these conversations.
Thank you so much for joining everyone today.
Okay, so to wrap up everything for today, thank you, Naomi, and thank you, Alicia, for your presentation. Thank you everyone for attending today's session.